As a Christian, I never understood fully the concept of the flood on a board. Where did the water come from? The Bible clearly says that in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the seventh day of the second month, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So if you look at the heliocentric model, where all that water comes from, you see the ISS in space, where there is no water there. In the center of Earth, all you see is lava. So it doesn't really make sense. I never fully understood. The Bible says the waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 15 cubics. So it doesn't really make sense on a ball earth. It would look just like this one here, a blue ball full of water everywhere. So when you look at the flat earth model, everything makes more sense. You can compare here the two models, the Noah's Ark on the flat earth, how it makes sense, it makes no sense on the globe earth. So biblically speaking, the ball earth has nothing to do with the Bible. I also talked about Joshua. Then Joshua spoke to the Lord on the day when the Lord delivered the Ammonites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, sun stand still upon Gibeon, and you, moon, in the valley of Ayalon. So it can only happen on the flat earth model. It's impossible on the spinning ball earth. Soon after I came to realize the earth was flat, I started looking at the luminaries, and you can see the moon not only has its own light, it's also local. It's a local light. It illuminates where it goes. Genesis 1:16 says, and God made two great lights, the greater lights to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Another point that I spoke is the coming of the Lord. Behold, he come with the clouds, and every eye shall see him. It's easy to understand this concept on the flat earth map. On the ball earth deception, there's no way whoever is on the bottom of the ball can see the Lord coming from heaven, because the ball, heaven is everywhere, it's in all directions. It makes no sense. And some of them said that because of the electronics of today, satellites, they will be able. Well, I don't think the Lord is waiting for man's technology to advance so he could come back, so don't fall for that. And the last image that really spoke to me, like the Lord is in heaven observing the Son of Man, and the angels are waiting for the orders so they can take back what belongs to the Lord.
Let's observe gravity, the nature of gravitational pull, which we have been taught in schools and we have accepted for years and years of our lives. The first thing that many of you should already know is, as we're being taught in school, gravity pulls everything towards the center of the mass. In this case, when examining the spherical model of the earth which we have been presented in schools, gravity pulls everything towards the center of the earth, towards the center of this mass, or towards the core of the earth. That is the logic that is being presented and being taught in schools. Now, anywhere on earth, water does not bulge, water does not bend, water always remains leveled. No matter what you do, no matter how far you go, if you put water in any type of container, that water is always going to be leveled from one corner to another. It never changes. That is logic. That is nature. However, we are being taught in schools that because of gravity, water can be able to hold on this ball, on this spherical ball called Earth that they tell us, water is able to bulge because of gravity. In a way, I want you to understand that gravity works like magic. However, hold that thought. I want to make this as easy as possible for anyone to be able to understand, including young teens who are going to schools, and I want them to understand this. Here's an illustration of how gravity works, the gravitational pull. Let's take a line, and we're going to form a curve or a bend with that line. And that portion of the bend, that portion of curvature, let that represent a portion of the circumference of the spherical model of the Earth. So, the total circumference of the Earth as we are being given is about 24,900 miles. Let's just make it simple and say roughly 25,000 miles of circumference. Now, if we take that into account, let this portion of curvature that you are seeing, let that represent 1/5 of the total circumference of the Earth. So we have now 1/5 here, and what I want you to understand is how this gravitational force works on this spherical model. Observe, as we take into account 1/5 of the circumference of the Earth, gravity pulls everything towards the center of the Earth, or towards the core of the Earth. So here's an illustration. This is how it works. This G pull, this gravitational pull, pulls one end of this curve towards the center and the other end towards the center as well. This got me thinking, the best way to also illustrate this for you so that you can understand is, let us take into account a bow and arrow, for example. Now, I basically turned this animation so you can better understand this logic that I'm presenting to you, so you can understand it. If we take into account a bow and arrow, when one is holding a bow and they are pulling that arrow backwards, what's happening is the force is more concentrated towards the center. Where you are pulling the arrow, that is where you have the concentration of the greatest pull, and that results in pulling both ends of the bow towards the center of this force where you are concentrating your pull. This is what I want you to understand. The logic being presented is that the force of gravity pulls everything towards the center of the Earth. So, if you hold 1/5 of the total circumference of the Earth and take into account the curvature, what you have is a force that pulls one end of this curve and also pulls the other end, and they both get pulled towards the center. That, I hope you understand. So far so good, correct? Check. Now, if we look at the basic laws that govern fluid dynamics, and also when we go to look at the basic laws that govern the laws of thermodynamics, what we will find is consistency. Fluids move from areas of high concentrations to low concentrations. This can be both for gaseous fluids or for liquidous fluids. The laws of energy conservation also are supported by this same logic. Energy flows from areas of high to low. Temperature flows from hot to cold. Water moves from high points to low points. Now, I want all of you to understand, I'm being as simple can possibly be. I'm not one of those who wants to make things seem so complicated to make myself look more smarter than anyone. No. The intention is to make this as simple as possible, because I'm aware I have many young audience. So I want them to understand this so they can be able to better question their teachers in school. There are many numerous formulas that can be used to justify all of this, and many laws. But that is where we go into advanced thermodynamics. But let's keep this as simple as possible. Let's go to look at how rivers flow. Well, if you Google it, what you come across is the following. It states, and I quote, "If the source of a river is at a higher elevation than the mouth, that river will run from the source to the mouth. However, if that higher source is to the south of the mouth, that river will then flow to the north, or downhill." That is a very strong logic. That is how things work, which makes perfect sense. Now, here's something I want you to put into consideration. When we observe the ball, the globe supposedly spins from west to east. However, it is interesting to make note that there are many rivers that actually flow from east to west. So how can that be if you have a moving ball that spins at thousands of miles per hour, yet you have rivers that actually flow backwards? That is something that you can search and you will find that it is there. India is well known to have rivers that extend for hundreds and hundreds of miles, yet they flow backwards from east to west. In addition to this, when we go to look at France, the Loire River, it is well recognized and well known that the river flows south to north in the upper part and east to west in the lower part. Now, if you put water in motion and you're spinning that water at 1,000 miles per hour, should it not make sense that all the water should technically be moving in the same direction? But this is just something for you to think about. Let's go to the real fun of this subject, gravitational pull. Does it make sense? Let's go back and visit the illustration which I have given to you. Let's take that curve which you are seeing right now, right in front of your eyes. Remember, I said that that curve represents 1/5 of the entire circumference of the earth. So, that being said, if we do the mathematics, 1/5 of the circumference of the earth comes to exactly 4,980.2 miles. That is 1/5 of the circumference of earth. The next thing I want you to understand carefully is this. When you look at this curve right now, I want you to make note, it is important to make note that every single curve has a high point. And that high point is right at the middle of the curve. So in this case, if we go to the center of this curve, we sit at exactly 2,490.1 miles. That is where the highest point is on that curve. This high point is known as the apex point of any curve. Now, the main reason why I want you to understand this apex point is because it shows you clearly, you see for yourself that there is a climb. Now, spherical geometry determines that with a circumference of 24,901 miles, the curvature of finding the curve or the bend for that sphere is 8 inches per every square miles. So if we want to determine the height of elevation, take that apex point of 2,490.1 miles, square that value, times it by 8 inches per square miles, and what you get is an answer of 49.6 million inches. Step 2. You take that 49.6 inches, convert that into feet by dividing it by 12 inches per feet. What you then get is a value of 4.1 million feet. Now what you want to do is make this simple and easier to see. So you take that big value of feet, convert that into miles. Note that 1 mile has a total of 5,280 feet. So you take that value, divide that by 5,280 feet, and what you get is a total of 782.9038 miles. So now that you understand this, these steps which you have just witnessed right now, this is exactly what we're going to use to determine further calculations as the video proceeds on. Which means if you take 1/5 of the circumference of the earth, take that curvature into account, what you get is a rising value of 782.9 miles. Let that sink in, because I'm going to prove to you something that's going to hopefully strike you in the head in such a way that it will cause you to finally wake up to the nonsense of gravity. I picked 1/5 of the circumference of Earth because there are rivers that extend to nearly 1/5 of the entire circumference of the Earth. Rivers that extend for thousands and thousands of miles. For example, the Amazon River is said to be anywhere between 4,000 and 4,345 miles, versus the Nile River, which is said to extend at roughly 4,258 miles. Believe it or not, there's still an argument until today whether the Nile River is the longest in the world or whether the Amazon River is the longest in the world. However, I'm not going to explain why and all that stuff. No, I'm just keeping it simple. Let's take the average reading for the Amazon River. So when we take the values of 4,000 plus 4,345, divide that by 2, we get a total average reading of 4,172.5 miles. Rough estimate. That is still relatively close to being almost 1/5 of the entire circumference of the Earth when we look at that distance. So here's what we're going to do. Make note The Amazon River flows in an east direction. Every single river in the world, whatever direction it is flowing, it maintains that for however X amount of miles that it goes. So now let's put this into visual so that you may understand exactly what's going on. The Amazon River, roughly 4,172.5 miles. That is a distance to which there should be an extremely tremendous amount of curvature that one should take into account. So, when we go back into this visual here, the apex point or the highest point of this curve is at exactly 2,086.25 miles. That is the highest point. Now, the question is, how high is it exactly from the beginning? Well, when you do the math, we get a big number of 549.55 miles. That is how high of an inclination that one must rise in order to be able to account for the curvature. So in other words, the waters must overcome an inclination of 550 miles of height inclination. And when this river overcomes that height inclination of 550 miles, it will continue to flow the other way around and continue maintaining the exact same course. Now, I don't know if you paid attention or not, but I think many of you already know this. Rivers and waters, they flow from areas of high concentrations to areas of low concentrations. Rivers flow from high points to low points. If we go back to our illustration of that curve and we put this into perspective, and if we consider that the earth is truly a ball, does it make any sense to say that rivers can flow against a height rise of 550 miles and not drop in speed, and yet continue to flow at the exact same velocity from one point to another? Does it make sense? Gravitational pull is said to be holding the waters together. People argue that the reason why water stays or sticks on this spherical earth of theirs is because of gravity. They say that gravity is the reason why water can bulge on the spherical earth and not fall off. However, for argument's sake, let us agree that gravity does exist and it is pulling everything towards the center of the earth, including holding the water towards the earth itself. So if we now take the entire stretch of 4,172.5 miles and take into account the curvature, and now we're taking into account gravitational pull on both ends from one end of this curve to another, what should technically happen is the water should be flowing the opposite direction from the apex point. Water should not be rising uphill against this high inclination of 550 miles and not expect any type of a change in direction from the highest point of this curve. However, let's look at the Nile River. That's where things get even more interesting. You see, the first thing I want to point out to you is when you look at the Nile River, it extends from northern Africa all the way to below the equator to Tanzania, roughly 10 degrees below the equator. Here's the interesting thing. The Nile River does not flow south of the equator, but rather it flows northwards, flowing from below the equator towards the north. Now, how can that be if we are truly on a ball, on a spherical ball, and we have this equator and we have water that instead is flowing upwards instead of flowing downwards? The River Nile extends at a distance, at a length of 4,258 miles. Here's the interesting catch. The highest point of the River Nile, according to the spherical model, is at 2,129 miles. And when you do the calculation, the mathematics to find out the height inclination, what you get is a total of 572.303 miles. These are miles of height inclination. In other words, that's how high the water must rise up to get to the highest point before falling back down again. After all, it does make perfect sense because you have to overcome that kind of a height if you're below the equator as well. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. But I want you to pay close attention to what I'm telling you. The water must rise up against the height inclination. So how does that make sense? Water flows from high points to low points, not from low points to high points back down to low points. No, it doesn't work like that. These are things that don't make sense. It is simple logic, simple common sense. If you can't seem to get this around your head, if you can't understand this, there's a problem. You see, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm simply illustrating to you here is that you ultimately have to throw away all logic and all reason and all common sense out the window to buy into this stupidity called gravity. When you look at this for yourself, you will clearly see that there's a big hole right there, right in front of you. And anyone who is going to say, well, gravity is the one that actually assists all of these rivers to flow the way they do, then that means what you are simply saying is that gravity moves in all different directions, which does not work. I have more interesting videos about gravity that are coming across your way. So I'm not going to elaborate too much on this. All I'm going to simply tell you is this. You have been fed with information that further assists you in keeping you in darkness. The education system has made you feel like the minute you start to become a free thinker and you're thinking outside of the box and you're questioning everything that you have been taught in schools, they have conditioned your mind in such a way that the minute you think differently, you are automatically uneducated and you are dumb and you are stupid. However, the ones who are pointing fingers at you, calling you stupid and calling you dumb because you are thinking outside of the box and you're questioning what you've been taught, they themselves are simply following the crowd. They're following other people. They don't follow their own minds and their own decisions. They base their decisions based on what others think and based on how others walk. That is how they base themselves. However, when you become a free thinker and you're thinking outside the box and you're thinking differently, you become different from the world. You become a different creature. And the world will notice that you are different and that you are not a part of it. And if you are different from the world is going to hate you. And this can be justified and found also in scripture. The Bible, in the book of John chapter 15 verses 19, the word of God says, if you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. However, if you wish to go back to staying asleep, that is entirely up to you. That is entirely up to you. Nobody's going to stop you.